Let's now speak to our correspondent Ayman Mohyeldin, who joins us live from Cairo. Ayman, we were watching pictures earlier of the protest today in Tahrir Square and the symbolic funeral of this journalist who was killed in this unrest. And I know that you, more than anyone else, know the pressure that journalists have been in these last 2 weeks. You were detained for several hours yesterday on Sunday. Tell us about your experience, Ayman.
Well, you know, as we have been for the past several weeks, we've been reporting daily from Liberation Square. And yesterday, as I was making my way into Liberation Square, I was essentially stopped by the Egyptian military, and there was a young recruit there, I guess, who asked me for my identification. And when I presented him with my identification, he asked me what you were coming to do. And I simply said that I was a journalist. I didn't really have any, major equipment on me, just a small camera and my cell phones. And immediately it seemed like he was taken back, a little bit surprised by it, perhaps because of my identity. At that time, they didn't know who I was working for, and they didn't ask me, really. It was just the mere fact that I was a journalist who was trying to go into Liberation Square seemed to be enough for them to take me for further questioning. And so they immediately removed me from the entrance to Liberation Square and took me to a holding area not too far away from the National Museum, which is where they've kind of set up, the military at least has set up their operational command. And when we were there, I had everything really taken off of me. I was handcuffed with plastic wire. I was blindfolded, and I was made to sit on the pavement for about 5 hours or so with several other people, including other journalists who were there, as well as people who were simply being taken by the military for various reasons or sorts. And over the course of the 9 hours that I was essentially in custody, I was interrogated a few times. I was asked by people, who I worked for, what I did, and then they started asking me slightly more, intimidating questions like, what did I think of the protest? What do I think the military is doing? Who was I with? And they were ultimately saying to me what I was doing in Egypt. Why don't I just go back to the United States, where I came from, and why I was trying to project a negative image of Egypt to the outside world. And so it was a bit of a long ordeal, and certainly, what I saw there was a bit difficult compared to what, the other people that were going through was a lot worse.
So, again, just to reiterate, Ayman, this was the military interrogating you yesterday.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, when I first arrived at the Liberation Square, it was just the regular military that was there screening the people. Then we were handed over to the military police, which essentially took everything off of me, detained me, blindfolded me, and tied my hands and, I guess sat me down on the pavement. And throughout the course of the day, I was interrogated on more than one occasion. In fact, I was told I was going to be transferred over to military intelligence by the end of the evening. That didn't happen because of the intervention that helped, get me released. But no doubt that even throughout the course of the day, I was interrogated by plainclothes police officers, or at least members of the military in plain clothes or civilian clothes.
Tell us more, Ayman, about what you saw there. Who were some of the people who had been arrested with you? Were they just foreign journalists? Were they Egyptians? And under what conditions were they? Were they being mistreated by the military there?
Well, when I actually was taken to the location, there was a cameraman from Reuters who happened to be from Gaza, from the Gaza Strip, who was also on assignment. He had also been taken. There was a reporter who I believe worked for the New York Times, and he was there, but he was immediately released. He was not of Arab descent. He was clearly a foreign national, but he was immediately questioned and turned around and let go. So there were at least at one point, by my accounts, 3 journalists. The other people that were there were individuals mostly from inside the protesters, from inside Liberation Square. And as I understood it from their interrogations, because this was happening in an open area, many of these people were either people who had lost some form of identification, people that the military was not happy with the way they were behaving. Supposedly one guy arrived to Liberation Square and had with him a small pocket knife, so he became a person of suspicion for them, and he was detained. I can tell you from what I saw and from what I heard, a lot of these people were beaten up. The military was dealing with them in a very aggressive manner. They were slapped, they were kicked. The military was trying to essentially subdue them. I don't think it was a matter of trying to coerce them for information, but in essence, the military was dealing with these people as prisoners of war. These were individuals who were trying to plead for their safety, for their innocence. Many of them were crying, saying that they were just simply caught up in the wrong moment. But the military showed no mercy, and on a few occasions, they really roughed them up pretty badly. They kicked them in the back of their heads. One of the soldiers that was there had with him a small taser gun. gun. He was instantly, instigating that taser to try to scare the prisoners or the detainees really into submission and behaving. Many of them had their shirts taken off of them, and many of them were also, severely whipped and slapped and essentially pushed around in a way to kind of control them, even though they weren't doing anything that was very disobedient, but merely just trying to plead to the military that they had been caught up and they had been taken by mistake and they wanted to be released.
Once again, the people who were there, you mentioned that there were a lot of people of Arab descent. Those who were being beaten, as you said, by the military, were they Egyptians? And did you get a sense of whether or not they were pro or anti-Mubarak?
Well, these individuals definitely were Egyptians. The only two people that technically were not were myself and and the colleague who worked for Reuters, who was a Palestinian cameraman. Though we were the only two that were not carrying any Egyptian passports or Egyptian identification. The others all were. The problem that the military felt with some of these individuals is, for example, on the way in and around Liberation Square, there are these popular committees, these neighborhood watch committees. Some of these individuals were people, for example, who were saying that they had lost their ID, and so when they came to this committee, the committee was suspicious of them, why they were coming to Liberation Square, and then they were essentially taken by these committees and handed to the military. Once they were in the custody of the military brought them to this holding area where we were. Other individuals that were there were supposedly, again, according to the military that was interrogating them, accusing them of being pickpockets or being mischievous or trying to disrupt the peace. So you don't get really a sense of their political ideology in all of this, but that they were somehow just, a nuance, if you will, to the situation. Now, the military was really aggressive in the way it dealt with them. And so what it ended up doing was creating this sense of fear that people started saying, I have nothing to do with these protests. I want out of here. I don't want anything. One of the individuals that was next to me said that he had come to participate in the protest because he was an anti-government protester or a pro-democracy protester. He was held for 24 hours and the government, or he was saying that the military was detaining him because he was active within inside Liberation Square, organizing the committees and stuff. But by the end of the evening, he had completely broken down. He was essentially crying and saying that he wanted to leave, that he had been, he had a really good salary, he got caught up in this mistake, and he promised the military that if he were to leave, he would never return again to Liberation Square and not participate in this. And all of us actually, when we were released, were asked to sign papers saying that we would not return to Liberation Square unless we got some type of permission from the military. They were helpful enough to tell us how we can get that permission, but they made it very clear that we couldn't just simply return to Liberation Square without letting them know in advance that we were going to be coming or having some kind of proper, authentication or verification to let us in.
Certainly, Ayman, we're really glad to see you out of there and to see that you were not harmed. But of course, our thoughts are with all the people who are still there. Do tell us, because we've heard of the pressure in which journalists have been in the last 2 weeks. We've heard of French journalists being beaten as well and arrested as well. Some of them even have left Egypt. Give us a sense of the pressure, in which these journalists have to work every day. And do you get a sense that it's easing at all after the widespread international reaction?
Well, what's emerged really now is two different realities for journalists here. When you're out in the streets and you carry with you some identification that you are a foreign journalist and that perhaps you're just walking through the streets trying to do this story or tell the story about the people, you're subject to the kind of chaos or lawlessness that existed on the streets for some days after these protests began. And so many journalists took these cautions of hiding their press identifications, hiding sometimes their foreign identifications, so that if they are stopped or if they were stopped, they wouldn't be harassed and they wouldn't be intimidated, because as we've seen, sometimes, particularly last week during the pro-Mubarak protests, there was a very aggressive campaign to try to, reach foreign journalists and tell them, show Egypt, show the pro-Mubarak supporters and all this, which many journalists, wanted to show originally, but were just simply hampered from doing so. That is one reality. And so many journalists have been a little bit cautious to go out and take that extra measure by concealing their identity when they're dealing with the people. When you're dealing with the government says, well, no, we're allowing foreign journalists to work and they are allowed to operate. And so they then show the journalists their identification and they're dealt with the pressures of the government restrictions restricting their access. And as we were reporting, there was a Reuters cameraman, some of the names that you mentioned as well. So there now are really two different realities emerging for journalists, and that's what is making it so difficult. Personal safety and just the challenges of dealing with the government against this backdrop of trying to tell the story for the people here.
Certainly we appreciate your work. Ayman Mohyeldin in Cairo. Thank you, Ayman, for sharing your experience there with us. Thank you very much.